Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Toby, so good to have you once again here in Brisbane. I think.
Thank you. And welcome to AI Month. So this, I believe, is the first event of the National AI Month.
This is the very first event. In fact, the AI Month starts tomorrow.
we got special permission.
We managed to extend it by one day, but
a few hours.
Requests, a few hours. So it's absolutely wonderful to have you here. I think last time we were here was probably about a year ago or so when you were launching, or maybe a tiny bit more than that, when you were launching your previous book.
Yes.
So this is book
which is also available for sale later on. Machines Behaving Badly.
Buy those books. Toby will be signing them today. Toby, before we dive into your fantastic book number 4, I just wanted to ask you to say a few more words about yourself, so that people in the room can get to know you a bit better as a person. They know that you love 2001: The Space Odyssey, and that those of you who read the book, that this is the movie that made you decide that you wanted to study artificial intelligence. But tell us a bit more about yourself as a person.
Oh, that's a hard question. Yeah, as a young boy, I remember being in the cinema, being blown away by... You have to remember, this was the Apollo time, and you used to watch the Apollo missions in little black and white TV. Very fuzzy images of the astronauts going to the moon, and then turn up at a cinema and in full surround sound and color, you saw the future. You saw man in space, and you saw, of course, the central character in 2001, The Space Odyssey, was HAL, the AI computer that has, mischievous intent. And if you think about it, today, we have HAL. Everything that computer did, it played a very mean game of chess. It was able to have a conversation with the person. It was able to open the Baypod doors, or not, as it chose to do, as Alexa will do for you today. So all of those capabilities are now easily available in your home. So that future I remember seeing in beautiful Technicolor on the screen as a young boy back in the 1970s, is now here. But I remember I got given a computer at a very young age back then, thinking, well, actually, that computer, that vision I saw on the screen, something that we could start building. Maybe it could happen in my lifetime. And then I've spent the last nearly 50 years going about that.
Thank you, Toby. Piece of trivia for everyone: HAL, the computer from the movie, the name was just one character away. Every character was just one character away from IBM. So not sure if it was intentional.
It was intentional, yes. Arthur C. Clarke deliberately chose the name for that.
Toby, this is your book number 4. Why?
I should say that the cover is, of course, a fake Rembrandt made by artificial intelligence to look like a real one.
Did you prompt that picture?
No, this was actually, there was a project a couple of years ago with IBM, actually, where they took lots of the original Rembrandts and taught a neural network the style of Rembrandt, and asked it to produce a painting, which they then produced in the style of Rembrandt, and that was the result with of course, the digital eyes was something the graphic designer added on top. So yes, this is a book that, like all of the books after the first book I wrote, is a response to the world that we're finding ourselves in. Response to the sorts of questions that I get from audience like this. And funnily enough, I have to explain to people, because the book seemed very perhaps very topical, very at the moment, that I started writing the book before ChatGPT came out. I think I have to make that clear. But ChatGPT, of course, features quite significantly in the book. Lots of examples of how ChatGPT is faking its comprehension of what people and faking its answers. And indeed, I started writing this book when the predecessor to ChatGPT program called a large language model called GPT-3 came out, because I realized that we were going to be soon very fooled by all of this fake AI and AI fakes that were coming into our lives, and perhaps we should prepare ourselves for it. And the funny story is that when I gave the original draft of the book to the publisher said, "Oh, that's quite very topical book, very interesting book, Toby. But what's GPT-3?" I said, "It's the predecessor to ChatGPT, which is the only thing that people now are talking about." And they said, "Oh, well, very good, but you're going to have to rewrite the book, remove GPT-3, replace it by ChatGPT." So I had to go back, rewrite the whole book. And of course, all of the examples that I had to illustrate the failings of GPT-3, now ChatGPT got right. So I had to find new examples, new funny examples to illustrate all of the points again. But there were different ways, different failure modes that ChatGPT has that, again, illustrate all the points.
GPT-3, GPT-4,
yes,
4.5, so there will be constant updates of it.
Yes, so as you point out, if you open the book, the first words of the book are, "This book is out of date." Because it's impossible to keep up, right? So,
however, the very same page, you say that you're confident that the issues raised in the book
yes,
will not be out of date, and I think this is what a good book should be, right? One that's
out of date,
both out of date and at the same time timeless.
I'm glad my publisher brought the idea. They did say, "Are you sure people are going to buy a book that begins, 'This book is out of date'?" But I said, trust me.
Frankly, I think it's better than not saying
yes. Although I was a bit annoyed, the first review that turned up on Goodreads complained the book was out of date. Like, the first words of the book. Oh.
Did you read the book?
And it's like,
well, look, honestly, some people just gloss over the preface, right, and just go straight into the content that's out of date. Toby, while you were sharing a bit about the motivation behind writing the book, you did say that back then you were expecting people to fall victims of this new development.
yes,
Right, large language models. Victims in many, many ways. And I wanted to touch upon something that I know about you falling victim to some of the development of that. And that is namely a database called Books3. Would you like to elaborate on this one?
Yeah, so this has come out since I've written the book. But these models, these large language models that are now amusing us, entertaining us, and confronting us, are the product of training on large data sets. In fact, the story of most artificial intelligence today, not just large language models, is it's a success story about training on large data sets, whether we're getting computers to understand speech or understand images or understand text, the limited way they understand text. It's about throwing data at them. And ChatGPT, for example, is trained on something of the order of a third of the internet. They've taken huge data sets of data, text data that's available online, and poured them into this model. So it learns frequencies of words, the frequencies of sentences, and has learned in some sense to be able to create the style that it has.
You wrote that the entirety of Wikipedia is about 1% of the content, right? So that's how.
Just to give you the scale, it's got the whole of the US patent database. It's got all of Wikipedia. It's got vast bits of the web that are being trawled, all large bits of Reddit, question and answer site. And now we have discovered it includes a data set called Books3, which is 200,000 or so books that was just pirated from the web. Books that were chosen to be up to date. Because if you just wanted to have books, you could have chosen Project Gutenberg, right? The out of copyright books. You'd have got I think someone should do this actually. You'll get a very quaint chatbot that would speak in a very old-fashioned way. Methinks that it might be quite polite and interesting chatbot to have. But they didn't, in part because they wanted to speak in a very current way, and secondly, because of the content. Right, so there's two things that you achieve by training on the data. One is you learn how to speak language, to use language. And secondly is you learn the content. And the reason that ChatGPT can answer questions on everything from astrology to zoology is because it's been trained on content. It includes everything from astrology to zoology. So about a month or so ago, I was somewhat, not surprised, I was somewhat disappointed and annoyed, upset, various emotions came through my body when I discovered that my books were included in this data set. They've been chosen probably because they want the chatbot to be able to talk knowledgeably about AI, so some current books on AI are a good place to start. But without my consent, without my publisher's consent, and they can now produce a very good synopsis of my books. And not surprisingly, many authors, and I'm one, I would include myself amongst that, were outraged that this heist of all our information has gone ahead, and there has been no attempt to either seek consent, and there's no attempt also to try and return value back to the creators of all this intellectual property, which seems to me ultimately not a sustainable place to be. If this vast wealth being generated, these companies are worth billions of dollars. I think you can compare this to Napster. So if you wind back 10, 20 years ago, we started streaming music with Napster and services like that. That content was stolen. It was all stolen music, right? None of the value was being returned back to the artists. And after a year or two, we worked out that was not sustainable. And we had to find a model in which some of the value was returned to the artists, because otherwise musicians are not going to be able to survive. It's going to destroy our cultural heritage. And now we have streaming services where some money flows back. I'm not sure that it's yet entirely sustainable. If you're Taylor Swift, then you get lots of money. If you're a jobbing musician, it's still a great struggle. Not much money, not much of that streaming money returns back to jobbing musicians. So I'm not sure we're still in the fully sustainable, but it's more sustainable than it was when everything was stolen. And I think the same will have to happen with intellectual property that we find. So books and the like.
Perhaps 5, 10 years from now, I'll have my personal replica bot that I'll be able to pay 99 cents for this bot to read your books, right? And increase its knowledge or basically be able to converse with me about your books. Maybe that would be a business model. Maybe we'll see the emergence.
Yeah, I saw someone actually suggest, and I think I can see this happening, which is that every time a publisher releases, for example, a non-fiction book, you release the chatbot that's trained on that book, so that you can have a conversation, right? So instead of reading the book, but hopefully you would still read the book, because there's something in the way that the author has decided to present those ideas. But at the end of the book, you'll be able to then ask the book questions. I think I would quite like that idea. That'd be quite good. So the book would be able to answer, hopefully reasonably knowledgeably, what was in the book, and be able to answer any questions you might have left after having read this book. I think that would be a wonderful way of using this technology to amplify and not to replace what we already do. I still think there's great value to books. I thought, well, an author thought, the expert in this field thought that was the way to try and present this, explain. Those were the ideas that you needed to understand. I think there's value in following that. That's why books are so pleasurable to read. I don't have to persuade this audience that the books are the future as well as the past, right? So you come to a book launch, you must love books. So you're one of my kind already. Right?
It has to be said when you read this book, it's a bit like an intimate conversation with Toby, because that wall is not there. Toby is having this conversation with readers. It always happens, Toby. Whenever we start the conversation, my whole plan completely goes off the rails. So what we talked about, the book's 3 data set and the sort of the potential future, definitely I do want to talk about it, but I wanted to take a few steps back to what's the beginning of your book, where you show us that faking it is much older than we think it is. What is your favorite among those examples from pre-computing, almost prehistoric times, when it comes to faking it?
Well, I'm glad we start there, because you're right. I think it's really important to acknowledge that from the very beginnings of the field, and we can perhaps discuss that shortly, from Alan Turing's first paper the very first scientific paper written about artificial intelligence was about faking it. But even before then, as you say, there's a wonderful prehistory that goes back 1,000 or more years of where people have been trying to fake, if you like, artificial intelligence through the automaton that have been made, through probably I suspect many people's favorite example is the mechanical Turk. This favorite example from the 17th century, where they built this automaton, this supposedly a mechanical Turk, was dressed in Ottoman robes, sat in front of a meter-long chest that had a chessboard on top, and this mechanical figure would pick up the chess pieces and play a mean game of chess. Indeed, it's not recorded that actually he had ever lost any chess matches. He beat a number of famous people, including Napoleon, President Franklin. It was quite a hit. It was toured around Europe, toured around the United States of America. It was, an amazing piece. If you think back to those times, you'd be able to see this mechanical beast, and had this. You could open the chest, and there was this intricate clockwork mechanism inside that you were led to believe was playing the chessboard for you. Of course, reality discovered afterwards was that it was all a fake. There was actually a human hidden in the cabinet who was making the moves. And the mechanical Turk was, in many senses, the first demonstration of an artificial intelligence to play a good game of chess, and yet it was entirely fake. And of course, mechanical Turk lives on today. It's a service offered by Amazon, where they get humans to pretend to be machines doing things.
Which is exactly what many startups in the past decade were using to fake artificial intelligence. We were thinking that it was.
There are a number of stories, a number of examples I give in the book of startups that were faking it till they make it, that they were pretending that they could scan your expenses in, this is expensify.com, that they had this artificial intelligence that could take a handwritten receipt with your expenses, scan it in, automatically enter it into your accountancy system. The reality, of course, was that there were some lowly paid people in Africa who were being paid to quickly type, to read these expense slips and quickly type them in and then send them to you.
Let's go back to 1940s, 1950s. Alan Turing, one of the greatest minds in computing, likely to be remembered for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Did he coin the term artificial intelligence?
No, he didn't, but he wrote what is considered by most people to be the first paper about artificial intelligence, computer machinery intelligence, a famous paper from the 50s, where, and you have to put the context, the historical context here, computers were just becoming widely available. Mainframes were just starting to be sold in any volume, and people were starting to think what we could do with these things. And so he asked the question, what if could we get computers to think? And in this paper, he said, well, the problem is that's a rather ill-defined problem. What does the word think mean? And so he came up with what is now known as the Turing test, way to finesse this problem. It's what he called the imitation game, which is you sit down with the computer and you sit down with the person, you have a conversation through a terminal with the person or with the computer, you ask them questions, you can't tell the person from the computer, then you might as well say that the computer is thinking, just like the person is thinking when they're answering your questions. But if you think about that, and if you look at the example questions that, in fact, Alan Turing gave in that paper, is to illustrate the sorts of things that you would ask the computer to decide whether it's a computer or a human, it's a game of deceit. It's a game of the computer trying to pretend to be human. And so from the very beginnings, it's in some sense, I say this, it's an original sin that goes back to the very beginnings of the field, that we were trying to build systems to fool people, that we're going to fake their ability to do things that humans do. And that has been with us from the very start.
Isn't generative AI...
I didn't ask you the question. Who came up with the word artificial intelligence, which was the famous John McCarthy.
Dartmouth College.
For the Dartmouth College summer school, that he came up with the name. And for actually most of the last 50 years when I've been working in AI, I have thought it was a terrible name. About the Terminator. There's so many things that were wrong with the name that for many years I thought, why couldn't we have called it informatic, like the Europeans might call it? Why didn't we call it cybernetics, which no one knows what it is? Why did we call it artificial intelligence? And how much trouble that has caused us. But as I wrote this book, I came to the conclusion that for all its problems, I actually think it's a spectacularly good name because there's that word artificial in there. And that we normally don't focus on that word. We normally think about intelligence. I'm not surprised, because intelligence is the one thing perhaps that makes us special. It's the human trait that has got us to where we are. But people don't put much focus and attention on the word. It's not artificial. And I've increasingly grown to realize that it is actually a really important word. It's there to remind you that the intelligence that we build in machines is going to be very artificial, very different to human intelligence. And we should not be fooled to think it's going to be like human intelligence. And the metaphor, I'm not sure if I give in this book, but I've given in one of my previous books, the metaphor is artificial flight and natural flight. So all of you know what natural flight is. That's the stuff that birds and bees do with flapping wings and feathers and all of that kerfuffle. And there's artificial flight, which is what got me here to Brisbane today, which was in a jet plane with big fixed wing and a large jet engine behind me that's pushed me through the air. They're both solving the same problem, which is heavier than air flight. They're both answerable to the same pieces of physics, the Napier-Stokes equations of hydrodynamics. But it's a different engineering solution. Actually, the artificial solution, the aeroplane, the jet plane that got me here, is arguably a much better solution in terms of efficiency and speed than the one that nature came up with. But we should not confuse them, right? If we tried to build planes by flapping wings, I suspect we would still be trying to build planes. We haven't got very far with flapping wings. We got very far by a different, and that should be a clue that the intelligence that we build is anyone there?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. The limited intelligence that we build in machines might be quite different, quite artificial, than the intelligence that humans have.
The metaphor used in this book was the mechanisms of motion in nature. So,
yes.
So you talked about the wheel as an invention, the artificial invention.
The wheel doesn't occur in nature. Nature did not invent the axle. And it's the most efficient move. Nothing builds the efficiency of a bicycle. The most efficient form of transport is the bicycle. More efficient than any animal is the bicycle, because it's got an axle and a wheel. If you've got a paved, if you haven't got paved ground, then I believe the kangaroo is one of the most efficient. Rough terrain, over tarmac terrain, nothing beats the wheel.
That's right. Toby, before we ask our audience for some questions, I want you to tell us a bit more about what you've done with the $7 million that you won in a poker tournament.
Right, so I asked one of these large language models for my biography. Of course you did, right? Once fancy.
Who's Toby Walsh, right?
Yeah, see, the first question you ask, this supposedly capable large language model. So, and there's a lot about me on the web, right? So every time I give a talk, there's a bio, there's a Wikipedia page about me, there's a bio on the World Economic Forum. There's lots of bios of me available on the web. So it's been trained on the web. These large language models like ChatGPT are going to know about me. So I thought it would be interesting to see what does it think about me. So I asked it, write me a biography of Toby Walsh. And it begins a biography where absolutely everything in the biography is wrong. It gets, but what's beautiful and worrying at the same time is that everything it gets wrong is nearly right. It's plausible, but actually wrong. So I'm born in the wrong year in the 1960s. I'm born in the wrong city in the United Kingdom. I was born in a different city in the 60s in the United Kingdom. I went to a British university. I went to a different British university. And so I went through my career getting everything just slightly wrong. But if you only knew me vaguely, it would have been plausible. So if someone I went to university...
You have a twin brother, right? So it could have been your twin brother.
My twin brother, yes. But if you ask someone I went to university with, the beautiful bit was, at some point, I gave up artificial intelligence and decided to do something more lucrative, which I became a professional poker player. And apparently I was quite a good professional poker player because I actually won the World Series. I won $7 million, as you see in the World Poker Championship. In fact, I think I would have remembered. The funny thing about this is that it's plausible. I do know people who have given up sorts of things I do, become professional poker players. And if you asked anyone I was an undergraduate with at university who knew me vaguely, knew I was, a competent mathematician, knew my interests and so on, would have said, if you told them, oh, Toby, gave up that strange AI stuff that he was going on about at university, became a professional poker player. They said, oh, yes. Yeah, I can imagine that.
All right. What should we ask Toby?
Hey, Toby and Mark, thank you for this interesting conversation. Toby, you mentioned that the difference between artificial intelligence and natural or human intelligence, but you also mentioned that a lot of these models are trained with sources that come from human intelligence, like books written by humans. So how do you see that? Is it some kind of hybrid intelligence then? Because all these patterns come from human-generated knowledge, and as such, would you really see it as purely artificial?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. You're right. They are reflecting back ourselves. And people shouldn't be surprised. In fact, what surprises me is how polite and reasonable these chatbots are. If you look at what you can find on the internet, I'm amazed that they don't speak more crudely, with more extreme views than they do, because they've been trained on a remarkable amount of stuff. Right? And indeed, actually, if you look at the trend, the direction of travel now, people are looking at more carefully curating the data they're trained on. I suspect that's going to give us much greater improvements in performance. It's remarkable how just pouring, literally, content of the internet into systems can give you anything reasonable. So in that respect, they're reflecting back on us. But what I take from their success, their fluency, is that we've actually overestimated human intelligence. That there's a huge amount of communication that humans do that requires minimal intelligence. Writing a business letter doesn't actually, we've overestimated how often we engage our brains. And lots of the communication we do is quite formulaic. And we have now taught those formulas to machines. which is why I've written my last business letter. I take the 4 dot points, I give it to ChatGPT, I say, write me a business letter that covers these 4 points. It writes a beautifully polished business letter. If it's too polite, I say, make it a bit angrier. It writes it a bit angrier. I say, too angry now, make it a little politer again. It makes it a bit politer again. It's learned those formulas. And actually, there isn't a huge amount of intelligence in writing a business letter. We've overestimated, in many respects, human intelligence.
Thank you. Bernadette Alan Wood. I have a question, but I'm going to ask you to dovetail with what you just said. I just got done reading and marking 40 essays for our 3rd-year undergraduate students' final semester in digital media analytics, and the topic was to analyze metadata about the voice referendum that I pulled from a social media platform. They were very well written. There's no question that the majority of these students use some form of assistive AI. So that's my observation in real time. And my question is, do you think that's a positive thing, that maybe they're learning more because they're learning how to structure an essay, a 2,000-word essay, or is it making them dumber?
Oh, really great. Another fantastic question. I mean, well, I think we could spend the rest of the evening trying to look at all the parts of that question. And I think all of those things are possible. ChatGPT is much better than Grammarly at writing. It's a very good writing tool. And many of my colleagues have come to me and said, you know what, my PhD students, though they tend to be the PhD students who are speaking English not as a first time, are much smarter than I thought they were. They're handing in much better work than they used to hand in. It's their novel ideas, but now expressed in a much better way because they've got these tools. And in some sense, yes, these are useful tools that can help us communicate. But equally, we do have to worry if they become a crutch and that we lose those analytical, critical thinking skills. I imagine we're going to end up in a place that we ended up with calculators. I remember when I was a boy, there was a big debate back then about being given access to calculators. And for my O-level exams, 16, I was not allowed to use a calculator, but by the time I got to my school evening A-level exams, you were allowed to use calculators. And now if you go into a school, in a primary school, you don't have really access to a calculator. You have to learn how to do arithmetic. You have to learn how numbers work. And then when you've got some command of that, you're given access to a calculator. And now, I've got a calculator on my watch. I've got a calculator on my phone. I'm never without a calculator, but I can still do the mental arithmetic, which is important to understand the way that numbers work. And I think the same will be true of writing. These tools are going to be part of our lives. They are going to write us our business letters, read our business letters. They're going to be really useful tools to help us communicate. But equally, communication itself is an important skill. We have to remember to learn those skills. And we are lazy, and we are naturally lazy, because it's helped us survive. We could risk dumbing ourselves down. Those important skills. I mean, it's already the case that one worries about the attention span of people these days is being reduced by the way that we consume information at the moment. And that we're constantly being interrupted. Again, a room full of people who love books know how wonderful it is to be able to sit on the couch with a book and not be interrupted by the book and focus for 2 hours on a book. Well, I mean, and what's interesting, I always point out to people, if I sit down and read a book for 2 hours, I reflect on what I've learned, what I've taken from that. It is way more than what I take from watching a movie for 2 hours, watching a documentary for 2 hours. It is a much more efficient way of transmitting that and communicating that information. I don't know if I fully answered your question.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Helen. I've got a reflection and then a question. And the first reflection is when you say artificial intelligence. You like that word. I'm not sure I do, because I think we're comparing the intelligence to human intelligence, and there might be natural animal intelligence. So I prefer digital intelligence. Anyway, I'm just putting that there, that humans are incredibly egotistical and we think intelligence is only human. So that's just a reflection. But my question around your book, because I don't know about it, why did you write it? What do you want people to get out of it? Is it to warn people, to educate? What's the...
I'm sorry I left the impression that I like the word artificial intelligence. I like it and dislike it at the same time. So, but I used to only dislike it. Now I see reasons to like it as well. But there are, as you point out, there are still other aspects of it that still remain a challenge. Why I wrote the book, partly a warning, partly to, like most books, is to start a conversation. That a lot of what this requires, artificial intelligence is becoming a very embedded part of our lives. It's turning up in so many aspects of our lives, and there's a lot of myth and misconception and misunderstanding, and we have to be aware, for example, of its artificiality. You have to be aware that there's going to be a lot of deep fakes and fake AI out there that is going to be deceiving us, and so I wanted to try and help start the conversation that we need to have. That there's this new type of intelligence arriving in our lives, and we have to think carefully about where we let it into our lives, where we don't let it into our lives. It is going to be transformative. But technology is not destiny, and we get to make choices. And it's the message of not just this book, but in fact all of the books I've ever written, which is we need to make good choices. These are human choices at the end of the day. This is our society, our culture that we're constructing and creating. Technology is part of that. Technology shapes society, but society gets to shape technology. And people often think too much in the one direction. Technology gets to shape society, not remembering there's choices and direction and shaping going the other way.
I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on where you think Australia is with its AI capability and how we might, or where we might focus to support growing that.
Again, an excellent question we could spend the whole of the rest of the evening talking about. There are pockets of amazing excellence within Australia. I think people are always surprised to discover that AI started here at a very early age. We've always been great innovators. We are 5 times world champions in robot soccer. With respect to the Matildas and the Socceroos, we have lifted the crown 5 times. We have wonderful expertise here in Queensland in robotics and computer vision. The AI Hub is a wonderful example of a pocket of excellence where the state government and various other funders have had the foresight to invest. We have the most automated ports on the planet. We have the most automated mines on the planet. Our mines, many of our mines, given the way that commodity prices have gone up and gone down, our mines would not be competitive with the rest of the world, given our amazingly expensive wages, if we had not automated our mines. And the benefits have not just been in terms of dollars, there have been dollars, they've been in, for example, mine safety. If you go back 30 years, there would be 300 fatalities a year in mines. Last year it was 3 dozen. It's a tenth of what it was, still 3 dozen too many, of course. It's a tenth, literally, of what it was in just a couple of decades because of the automation. Literally, we've got people away from the coalface, and we've got machines to do those things. So great material benefits that have already come to Australia. So that's the positives part of the story. So you can see wonderful examples of excellence. Unfortunately, we have seen very inadequate investment, especially from the government. You look at, I look at my colleagues in other nations, competitor, rival nations, Germany, the UK, Korea, Japan, United States, whoever it is. You see governments make billion-dollar bets. The government here has made about 124 million, most of which has not been spent, as far as I can tell. Which is pathetic given the size of the opportunity, pathetic given the money they throw at so many wasted IT implementations or various other things. Where the potential return, Tech Council Australia recently did a report that estimated by 2030, a generative AI, that's not whole of AI, just generative AI, could add $100+ billion to Australia's GDP. I mean, we're talking large sums of money, 10 15% to our GDP. I see few other opportunities in the next few years of those sorts of returns. We're going up increasing headwinds in our economy. We're seeing increasing challenges through climate, global insecurity. I spend a lot of time talking to politicians and saying this to politicians, which is, we're not seeing the investment that respects the opportunity. I hope they're going to wake up soon and start making those investments.
I find it quite interesting, your colleague talking about digital media, the convergence of digital media data and generative AI. What do you see as the tipping point of that to disrupt social cohesion?
Again, we could spend the whole of the rest of the evening talking about that question. Yeah, and that is one of my concerns in the book, one of the things that does rather keep me awake, which is that I don't think we learned the lessons of social media. Social media should have been a wake-up call. Should have been a wake-up call that these technologies are disruptive. Some of that could be good. I mean, the Arab Spring was good, right? People were given voice, democratic voice. Unfortunately, there was a lot of crackdown on it. Social media, to begin with, was a voice for good. People forget Obama was the first social media elected president. Right? He got black people to come out to vote. He got young people to come out to vote. Gave those people voice for the first time. Gave them representation. Most people, I think, at the time thought that was a good thing. Sadly, at the next iteration of the US presidential elections, we got Trump. We got people take the exact same tools and algorithms and turn them in perverse ways that were not actually encouraging our democratic discourse. We're not giving voice to the underrepresented, the opposite. And I don't think we've learned those lessons. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take the reach of social media, ability to literally get into everyone's pocket at speed and scale and limited cost, with the power of a persuasion of AI. So you can personalize messages, you can generate fake video. We're not used to unseeing things. So that picture that most of you saw of the Pope wearing a white puffer jacket, fake, generated by AI. Right? But the problem is, you can't unsee that. Now, in that case, it's harmless. The Pope was being fashionable, right? The only person who missed out on that was the Pope. He should have gone out and bought a white puffer jacket and owned it. He didn't. He missed out. But anyway, we move on. But we saw shortly after that deep fake pictures of Trump being arrested by the NYPD. Fake. But if you think about what happened on January 6th, it didn't take much more than that to start those riots. Trump was not arrested by the NYPD. He was arrested by the Georgia police. But we can't unsee those images. We're not used to unseeing images. There are media reports that came out of the recent election in Slovakia where there were some deepfake audios released at the last minute, suggesting that the outcome of that election was potentially perturbed by those fakes being released at the last minute. And I'm fearful for what will happen. 2 billion people go to vote next year. It's more than half the world's democracies get to vote. All of Europe, all of the United States, all of the United Kingdom. us a year later, we have potentially toxic set of tools available now to people who want to get optimistic. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you haven't, because my concern is that everything's operating in silos. So you've got, whether it be ATO defense or intelligence over here, and data people over here, and very rarely do those two meet and actually say, well, what we're doing is looking at analysing our data. This is what can happen with people's personal data and how that's being used in very, it's not very often those two worlds actually meet.
You're right, but we should look, right? So, for example, we should look at China, right? So if you want to see what you can do with this technology.
I know what can be done, but from a defense mechanism, with an intelligence mechanism, I don't see a lot of the world using it, because a lot of the advice is taken from legal and policy people. Not very often do they actually get the marketing data analysts in, because they're people who know how to use that data really well at Harvard. But the various people know how to Harvard very well, and as a defense mechanism,
You're right. I mean, there's a fundamental problem here, which is that humans can be hacked. So this is the end of this problem, which is, and we've sort of ignored that. We ignored it because we didn't have really capable ways of hacking humans, right? But the whole point of advertising, $1 trillion industry, right, is to persuade people to buy stuff that they don't want, right? And we put up with that because the tools weren't very powerful, and we were going to buy washing powder anyway, right? So whether we buy Oma or Daz, at the end of the day, we've got clean clothes, right? But now the tools are becoming increasingly capable, and it's our democracy that's up for sale. And it's quite different, and it's quite important to realise that we're easily persuaded to do things that aren't necessarily in our interest.
I think you and I are on the same web line here. I was on Virtual Opportunities Congress back in the mid-90s at the UN Trade Point, and we deliberately delayed introducing digital TV worldwide because the world wasn't ready for it. Murdoch forced everyone's hand and adopted his own system and forced the world to go with it. The same things happened with the internet. You'll remember how the internet, when it was the intellectuals and the elite that were on it, it was an ordered where everyone knew what they were doing and you had to have some intelligence to get on it. Now, anybody can get on it and put anything up they like. And as you mentioned with Trump, a good example. I mean, when I was chairing communications, if I'd have still been chairing it, I'd have never allowed social media loose. Is there anything we can do now, or is it the genie out of the bottle?
Great perspective there. I remember in '93 when first browser, Mosaic, came out. I gave a demo of the first browser to my father, who's sorry. I gave a demo of the first browser to my father, who's a businessman, and he was really blown away with it. And I remember he said, the business opportunities on this are immense. And I remember saying to him, oh, you don't understand. Back then, you couldn't do anything commercial on the internet. You couldn't sell a second-hand book. I said, you'll be thrown off if you would do as much as try and sell a second-hand book. I remember saying these exact words, it would completely spoil the flavour of the place. I didn't realise how right I was, because it certainly has changed the character of the place quite significantly. And then the other problem is that we're losing the town square. We're losing the community. It used to be where we all saw the same TV programs. There were 3 channels or whatever it was. everyone would see the same programs, would share the same cultural reference points, would read the same newspapers. And people don't realize now that the world you see is completely tailored to you. Even if, I remember, I was looking at the Guardian newspaper the other day, and someone else was looking at the Guardian newspaper, and they were getting different articles. We're reading the same newspaper, but the Guardian knows I like the techie articles, but they knew this person liked the other personal biases. Not to confront me, perhaps, as much as it should be. And the world, the internet you see. And so I'm really worried that the cohesion that we get as a society is going to be destroyed by the fact that we are no longer sharing the same conversations.
We've run out of time for this conversation. There will be still more time to chat with Toby in a second once you've bought Faking It or Machines Behaving Badly.
I'd be happy to sign it.
He'll be happy to sign it. This conversation was slightly going in a bit of a dystopian direction just then, and I was not going to do it, but I will. Toby, you finished your book with a couple of paragraphs that were written by GPT-3, ChatGPT, one of those large language models or applications here. And the last sentence, it disturbed me. I'm not sure if it was supposed to, but I am disturbed. And so that's what the sentence says. And so I will leave.
I should explain before you read. So
Go for it.
I primed the language model with the book up to that point, and then asked it to write the final paragraph.
And the very last sentence is, and so I will leave everyone with one universal thought. The smartest person in the room is the one that closes the door. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Toby for this conversation.